My lunch break conversation with a homeless man led to discovering he was my childhood best friend's father, who had been presumed dead for 15 years. I almost walked away when he asked for spare change, but something about his eyes stopped me. They were the exact unusual shade of amber that had always made my friend Alex stand out in school photos. I was rushing through my usual Tuesday lunch routine, picking up a sandwich from the deli across from my office, when I noticed him sitting against the building. Another homeless person in the downtown area wasn't unusual, but something made me slow down as I passed. "Spare any change?" he asked, his voice hoarse but with an unexpected hint of education in his pronunciation. I was already reaching for my wallet when I glanced at his face. Something froze me in place. His weathered face was nearly hidden behind a graying beard, but his eyes, a striking amber color, triggered a memory I couldn't immediately place. Instead of just handing him money, I heard myself asking, "Would you like to share my lunch? I always order too much." He seemed surprised, but nodded. I sat down on the concrete beside him, ignoring the curious glances from passing office workers. Up close, that nagging familiarity intensified. "I am James," I said, unwrapping the sandwich and breaking it in half. "Richard," he replied, accepting his portion with dignity rather than desperation. "Thank you for this." As we ate, I learned Richard had been homeless for nearly 8 years after a series of catastrophes: job loss during the 2008 recession, followed by divorce, followed by medical bills from an accident that drained his savings. Before that, he'd been an architectural engineer. "I had a family once," he said quietly. "Lost touch with them after everything fell apart." That's when it clicked, those amber eyes, the mention of architecture. "Your son," I said carefully. "What was his name?" Richard paused mid-bite. "Alexander, he'd be about your age now." My sandwich nearly fell from my hand. "Alexander Walsh, who grew up on Maple Street, whose mother's name is Diana." Richard's eyes widened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because Alex Walsh was my best friend from 3rd grade until we graduated high school," I said, my voice barely steady. "And he thinks you are dead." The color drained from Richard's face. I explained how Diana had told Alex that his father had died in an accident about 15 years ago. Alex had even mentioned attending a funeral, though now I wondered what that funeral had actually been for. "There was no accident," Richard whispered. "Diana and I had a terrible fight. I said things, she said things, I left to cool off. When I came back the next day, the locks were changed. She wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't let me see Alex." He explained how Diana had obtained a restraining order based on things he insisted never happened, how he tried to fight it in court, but couldn't afford to continue the legal battle, how eventually, after years of failed attempts to contact his son, he'd given up. "I never imagined she would tell him I was dead," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought he just didn't want to see me." I pulled out my phone and found a recent photo of Alex from social media, now a successful architect himself, married, with a 2-year-old daughter named Lily. Richard stared at the screen, tears streaming into his beard. "He named his daughter after my mother," he whispered. "I called the architecture firm where Alex works," my hands shaking. "It's an emergency," I told the receptionist. 20 minutes later, Alex arrived at the deli, confused by my urgent message. He didn't recognize Richard at first. How could he? The well-dressed father who had taught him to ride a bike had been replaced by this weathered man in donated clothes. But when Richard spoke, when Alex saw those identical amber eyes he himself possessed, recognition dawned. "Dad," the words seemed to stick in his throat. What followed was too private, too raw to fully describe. There was anger, confusion, disbelief. There were accusations and defenses. There were questions I couldn't answer about why Diana had created such an elaborate lie. But there was also eventually an embrace between a father and the son who had mourned him for 15 years. Alex insisted Richard come with him immediately. They had too much to discuss, too much time to recover. As they left together, Alex turned back to me. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you recognize him when I wouldn't have?" I thought about the photographs in Alex's childhood home that I'd seen hundreds of times, about the school plays where I'd met Richard before the divorce, about the camping trip where Richard had taught us both to fish. I guess